The grand chamber stretched wide and tall with walls that seemed to shimmer like living crystal under lights that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Helen Carter stood at the center of a circular platform that floated a few inches above the polished floor. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face calm and professional. Behind her stood two other humans who had traveled across the stars for this moment. Commander Jake Morrison wore his military uniform with pride, and his jaw was set tight with tension. Dr. Lisa Hayes clutched a data tablet against her chest, and her eyes darted around the massive space, taking in the alien beings that filled every available seat and perch and floating space in the chamber. 200 different species from worlds scattered across the galaxy had gathered here today. Some looked almost human, with 2 arms and 2 legs and recognizable faces. Others were so strange that Helen had needed weeks of study just to understand how they communicated. There were beings made of crystalline structures that chimed when they moved. There were creatures that looked like floating jellyfish with dozens of tentacles trailing below them. There were serpentine forms that coiled around special pillars designed for their comfort. There were small furry beings and tall skeletal ones, and some that seemed to be made of pure energy, contained in shimmering fields. At the highest point of the chamber sat the presiding arbiter. Seth Cora was a being of living crystal, whose body reflected and refracted light in ways that made it hard to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice came through translation devices that everyone wore, and the sound resonated deep in Helen's bones. The arbiter raised one crystalline limb, and the chamber fell into complete silence. Even the constant humming and chittering and whistling that had filled the air stopped instantly. Helen felt her mouth go dry. This was it. 3 years of preparation had led to this single moment. Humanity had worked so hard to reach this point. They had opened their entire civilization to inspection by council observers. They had shared their history, both the good parts and the terrible mistakes. They had demonstrated their technology and their art and their philosophy. They had answered 10,000 questions about human nature and human society and human ambitions. Earth had unified under a single government just to prove they could work together peacefully. Crime rates had dropped dramatically. Wars had ended. Poverty had been reduced to almost nothing. Humanity had done everything the council had asked and more. The arbiter's voice filled the chamber with words that Helen had been waiting to hear for so long. The species known as humanity had petitioned for full membership in the Galactic Council. After careful deliberation spanning 3 standard cycles, this council had reached its decision. Helen allowed herself the smallest smile. Jake straightened his shoulders. Lisa took a deep breath and held it. The petition is denied. The words hit Helen like a physical blow. She actually stumbled back a step, and Jake reached out to steady her with a hand on her elbow. Denied. After everything they had done. After all the changes and sacrifices and newly. Denied. Around the chamber, various alien species made sounds that Helen's translator interpreted as satisfaction and agreement. Some were nodding or making whatever gestures their species used to show approval. They were happy about this. They wanted humanity to be rejected, but the arbiter was not finished speaking. Furthermore, humanity is hereby prohibited from establishing independent colonies beyond their home system. All extrasolar human settlements must be dismantled within 10 standard years. Humanity will remain confined to the Sol system under council supervision. Helen felt the blood drain from her face. This was not just a rejection. This was a prison sentence. Humanity had 17 colonies scattered across nearby star systems. Millions of people lived on those worlds. They had built cities and farms and factories. They had made homes under alien suns, and now the council was ordering all of it destroyed. Jake stepped forward, and his voice was sharp with barely controlled anger. On what grounds? We have met every requirement. We passed every evaluation. We did everything you asked of us. A serpentine delegate uncoiled from its perch, and its scales caught the light as it moved. When it spoke through the translator, its words were cold and final. Your species is too aggressive, too unpredictable. In our 10,000 years of records, no species has advanced so rapidly while maintaining such violent tendencies. You are a threat that must be contained. Lisa found her voice and pulled up holographic displays from her tablet. The images floated in the air, showing graphs and statistics and historical data. Our crime rates have dropped by 60% in the last century. We have unified our planet under a single peaceful government. We have eliminated most forms of warfare. What more do you want from us? A floating jellyfish-like being drifted forward and its tentacles waved in patterns that the translator turned into words. Time. Perhaps in another 1,000 years your species will have matured sufficiently. Until then, the quarantine stands. The Council believes in patience and wisdom earned through ages. You must prove yourselves worthy over centuries, not mere decades. Another delegate spoke up, and then another. They talked about humanity's history of warfare and conquest. They mentioned the atomic bombs and the world wars and the environmental damage humans had inflicted on their own planet. They spoke of humanity's rapid technological advancement as if it were a disease rather than an achievement. They cited studies and reports and psychological evaluations. Every word was another nail in the coffin of humanity's dreams. The arbiter struck a resonant gong that silenced all discussion. This council has spoken. The decision is final. Humanity may maintain trade relations through designated checkpoints, but territorial expansion is forbidden. Any violation will result in complete isolation and potential military intervention. Human ships will be monitored. Human communications will be observed. Human activities will be reported to this council. The species of Earth will remain in their home system until such time as the Council deems them ready for membership. That time is not now. That time may not come for many generations. Helen stood frozen as the chamber began to empty. The various species filed out through different exits designed for their different forms of movement. Some walked, some flew, some simply vanished through dimensional portals. None of them looked back at the three humans standing alone on the floating platform. Centuries of human dreams had just been crushed. The hopes of billions of people back on Earth had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. Children who had grown up dreaming of exploring the stars would never leave their solar system. Scientists who had dedicated their lives to understanding the universe would be trapped in a cosmic cage. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. What do we tell them? What do we tell everyone back home? How do we explain that humanity is not good enough? That we are too young or too violent or too dangerous? How do we tell people to give up their dreams? Jake's expression shifted from shock to something harder and more dangerous. His military training was taking over, and he was already thinking tactically. We tell them the truth. We tell them exactly what happened here today. We tell them that the Galactic Council has decided to put humanity in a cage. And then we show these alien bureaucrats what happens when you try to contain the human spirit. We show them what we do when someone tells us we cannot reach for the stars. We show them that humanity does not beg for permission. We take what is ours. Helen looked at her two companions and saw her own determination reflected in their eyes. The three humans left the council chamber with their heads held high. They did not know it yet, but their defiance was about to change the galaxy forever. The council had made a critical mistake. They had united humanity against a common enemy. They had given Earth's people a shared purpose. They had transformed humanity's scattered dreams into a single focused goal. The council thought they were protecting the galaxy from a dangerous young species. Instead, they had created exactly what they feared most. They had given humanity nothing left to lose and everything to prove. 6 months had passed since the council delivered their verdict, and the anger that had burned hot in those first days had transformed into something colder and more focused. President Daniel Cooper stood in the newly constructed Unity Plaza in Geneva and looked out at the cameras that would broadcast his words to every corner of Earth and every human colony in the Sol system. Billions of people were watching and waiting to hear what their leader would say. Daniel's face showed the weight of 6 months of difficult decisions, but his eyes burned with determination that had not wavered since the day Helen Carter returned from the council chamber with news of humanity's rejection. My fellow humans, Daniel's voice was steady and strong. For 6 months we have considered the council's decision. We have debated and protested and pleaded. We sent delegations offering compromises and promising oversight and accepting monitoring. All were refused. The council will not negotiate. They will not bend. They have made their judgment and they expect us to obey without question. Daniel paused and let his words sink in. Around the world, people gathered in homes and public squares and workplaces to hear what came next. In the Martian capital of New Phoenix, 300 million colonists watched on giant screens. In the orbital habitats around Jupiter, families huddled together. On the mining stations of the asteroid belt, workers stopped their drilling and listened. The Galactic Council believes we are too young and too dangerous and too human to be trusted with the stars. They have given us a cage made of good intentions and ancient prejudices. They offer us the role of children under their supervision. They want us to be wards of species who claim 10,000 years of wisdom. They tell us to wait and to be patient and to prove ourselves worthy over the next 1,000 years. Daniel's voice grew stronger and more passionate. But we are not children. We are the descendants of explorers who crossed oceans in wooden ships when they did not know what lay beyond the horizon. We are the children of those who climbed mountains because they were there. We are the heirs of those who reached for the moon when others said it was impossible. And now, when we have finally reached the stars, we are told to sit down and wait and be grateful for the scraps they allow us. Daniel straightened his shoulders, and his next words would echo through history. Humanity rejects this verdict. We will not dismantle our colonies. We will not abandon our dreams. We will not beg for permission to be free. As of today, I am authorizing Project Sovereign Throne. Humanity will build its own power structure, and our own network of alliances and our own path through the cosmos. If the Council will not give us a seat at their table, we will build our own throne. Gasps and cheers erupted simultaneously across the planet. Some people were shocked by such open defiance. Others were thrilled that humanity was finally fighting back. But everyone understood that this was a turning point. There would be no going back from this moment. On Mars, Governor Paul Richards watched the broadcast from his office, and a grim smile crossed his face. Mars had been humanity's first major colony, and it had taken 2 centuries of hard work to transform the dead red planet into something that could support life. 300 million people now called Mars home. They had built cities under protective domes and later under open skies as the atmosphere slowly thickened. They had melted the polar ice caps and brought water back to ancient riverbeds. They had planted the first forests and watched them grow. The Council wanted all of this abandoned and destroyed. Paul turned to his chief engineer, Susan Grant, who stood by the window looking out at the rusty landscape that was slowly turning green. Tell the construction crews to double their shifts on the defense platforms. If the Council wants Mars, they will have to pry it from our cold, dead hands. Susan nodded, and her fingers were already moving across her tablet, sending orders to work sites across the planet. The new shipyards are ahead of schedule. We will have the first Sovereign-class vessels ready within the year. These would not be exploration ships or cargo haulers. These would be warships designed for one purpose only: to defend humanity's right to exist among the stars. All across the Sol system, the same transformation was taking place. Mining operations in the asteroid belt shifted their focus from commercial extraction to military production. The colonies on Europa and Titan and Ganymede reinforced their habitats and began recruiting for new defense forces. In the orbital stations around Earth, scientists who had been working on theoretical projects suddenly found unlimited funding and government support. Projects that had been considered too dangerous or too expensive were now given top priority. Admiral Victor Kane commanded the Sol Defense Fleet from the bridge of the Earthship Defiance, which was humanity's largest warship. He watched President Cooper's speech on the main view screen, and around him, his officers shared his determination. When the speech ended, Victor turned to his communications officer. Send this message on all Council frequencies. To the Galactic Council. Humanity acknowledges your verdict and respectfully declines to obey. Consider this our resignation from your authority. Sol system is now sovereign territory. Any vessels entering without permission will be treated as hostile. The communications officer hesitated for just a moment, because sending such a message was essentially a declaration of independence and possibly of war. But then he nodded and began transmitting. Within minutes, the message would reach Council monitoring stations at the edge of the Sol system. Lieutenant Commander Amy Zhang looked up from her tactical console. Sir, we are detecting multiple Council monitoring ships retreating to the system's edge. Victor allowed himself a cold smile. Let them watch. Let them report back to their masters that humanity does not back down. Let them wonder what we are building out here in the dark. And we are building so much. The Council thinks they know us, but they only saw what we wanted them to see. They think our technology is limited, but they never saw our weapons research. They think we are bound by their rules, but we have been working on technologies they banned centuries. I go deep beneath the surface of Luna in laboratories carved from ancient rock Dr. Carl Newman and his team worked on. Humanity's greatest secret. The quantum slip drive would allow ships to travel between stars without using the Council's regulated jump gate network. The technology was dangerous and unstable, and the Council had banned it 3,000 years ago after it had destroyed several civilizations who tried to use it. But humanity had nothing to lose anymore. Carl stood before a massive prototype engine that hummed with barely contained energy. If we are going to be outlaws, we might as well break all the rules. The Council restricts this technology because it has destabilized civilizations in the past. They fear it because it is powerful. Perfect. We will master what they are afraid to touch. We will go where they cannot follow. His team worked around the clock running simulations and tests and calculations. The quantum slip drive would not be as fast as the jump gates for long distances, but it had one critical advantage. It was completely independent. Humanity could travel anywhere without asking permission or paying fees or being monitored by Council observers. They could explore regions of space that the Council had deemed unimportant or too remote to connect to their gate network. They could establish colonies that no one knew existed. They could build a civilization in the shadows and emerge only when they were strong enough that no one could push them back. Across humanity's domain, the message was clear and unified. The Galactic Council had tried to cage humanity for their own good. They wanted to protect the galaxy from what humans might become. They wanted to protect humanity from itself. But instead of grateful acceptance, they had ignited something far more dangerous. They had united a species that had spent most of its history divided. They had given humanity a common enemy and a common purpose. They had forced Earth's people to work together in ways that centuries of diplomacy had never achieved. Every nation and every colony and every habitat now shared the same goal: survival, freedom, the right to reach for the stars without asking, permission from beings who thought they knew better. The Council had given humanity 10 years to dismantle their colonies and accept their place in the cosmic order, but humanity had different plans. They gave themselves 5 years to become so strong that no one could force them to obey, 5 years to build weapons and ships and defenses, 5 years to develop technologies that would surprise and shock the ancient species who thought they had seen everything, 5 years to transform from a species begging for acceptance into a power that demanded respect. The countdown had begun, and it was not counting down toward compliance. It was counting down toward confrontation. The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson about what happens when you tell humans they cannot do something. You make them want it even more. 3 years had passed since President Cooper declared Project Sovereign Throne, and the transformation of the Sol system was nothing short of miraculous. What had once been a collection of peaceful colonies focused on science and exploration had become a fortress bristling with weapons and ships and determination. Captain Nicole Barnes stood on the bridge of the Earthship Vanguard and watched the stars slide past on the main view screen. Her ship was one of the new generation of human warships, and it was unlike anything humanity had built before. Sleek lines and deadly weapons and armor that could withstand hits that would destroy older vessels. The galaxy had been at peace for thousands of years, and the Council had never bothered to develop advanced military technology. But humanity had no such luxury. They were building weapons that the ancient species had forgotten how to make. Lieutenant Kevin Ross looked up from his sensor station. "Contact. Council surveillance drone marking our position again." This happened every week like clockwork. The Council sent automated drones to watch humanity's activities and catalog their ship movements and report back on everything they observed. Nicole smiled coldly. "Let them mark. Tag it with a tight beam message. Tell your masters humanity says hello." The drone continued its passive observation for another few minutes and then vanished into a jump point. Kevin shook his head. "They must have quite a file on us by now." Nicole's smile widened. "Good. Let them see what we are building. Let them worry about what it means." On Mars, Governor Paul Richards stood in the observation deck of Throne Station and looked down at the planet he had called home for 30 years. The massive orbital platform floated above the Martian surface like a crown of steel and determination. Throne Station was humanity's answer to the Council's grand crystal chambers. It was not as beautiful or ancient or ornate, but it was powerful and functional and unmistakably human. The station could house 50,000 people and contained shipyards that produced a new cruiser every month. Weapons platforms ringed the entire structure, and enough firepower to fight off a fleet bristled from every angle. But the station's true purpose was symbolic. Humanity had built a throne not to sit in someone else's hall, but to reign over their own destiny. Ambassador Helen Carter stood beside Paul, and together they watched construction crews swarming over the newest section of the station. "It is not as pretty as their crystal palaces." Paul's voice carried a note of pride despite his words. Helen turned to look at him, and her expression was fierce. It does not need to be pretty. It needs to be ours, and it is. Every bolt and plate and weapon system. We built this with our own hands using our own designs. No one gave us permission. No one helped us. This is proof that humanity does not need the Council's approval to be great. Deep in the research laboratories scattered across Luna and Earth and Mars, scientists worked on projects that would have been impossible just a few years ago. Dr. Carl Newman's quantum slip drive had achieved its first successful test 6 months earlier, and now prototype. Ships equipped with the revolutionary technology were mapping new routes through space. The quantum slip was slower than the Council's jump gates for long-distance travel, but it had one critical advantage. It was completely independent. Human ships could now travel between stars without using the gate network that the Council controlled and monitored. Carl stood before a holographic star map that showed hundreds of new routes his team had discovered. We are mapping new paths every day. The Council controls the gates, but there are thousands of stars they deem too remote or unimportant to connect. Those worlds are now within our reach. Admiral Victor Kane studied the maps with intense focus during a Joint Chiefs meeting. His weathered face showed the stress of 3 years spent preparing for a war that might come at any moment. And if we need to reach Council space quickly, Carl's expression turned serious. We have identified vulnerabilities in their gate network. If it came to war, we could disrupt their entire transportation infrastructure. It would take them decades to rebuild. The room fell silent as everyone processed what he was suggesting. Humanity had developed the capacity to cripple galactic civilization. They could cut off trade routes and isolate entire sectors and bring the ancient council to its knees. It was a weapon more powerful than any fleet. President Daniel Cooper sat at the head of the table and looked older than he had 3 years ago. The weight of his decision to defy the council had aged him visibly, but his resolve had never wavered. The council needs to understand something. We do not want war. We want to be left alone to grow in peace. But if they force our hand, we will do what we must. We will survive. We will be free, even if it means bringing down the entire galactic order. But humanity was not just building weapons and ships. They were also building alliances. Ambassador Kyle Porter worked from a hidden station in the outer reaches of the Sol system, where he met with representatives from species who sympathized with humanity's situation. Not everyone agreed with the Council's decision to quarantine humanity. Several younger races were frustrated by the Council's rigid hierarchy and slow bureaucratic processes. They saw in humanity a kindred spirit, a species that refused to accept the status quo. Kyle reported his progress during secure communications with Helen. The Zanari Collective is willing to share intelligence on Council fleet movements. The Draken clans think the quarantine is foolish and want trade agreements. Even some of the older species are questioning the Council's judgment. Helen leaned forward. Publicly? Kyle shook his head. No, but the cracks are showing. The Council has maintained order through consensus for so long, they have forgotten how to handle dissent. When everyone agrees for thousands of years, you lose the ability to manage disagreement. We are exposing that weakness. The 4th year brought new challenges. Council warships began conducting military exercises near the boundary of Sol system. Dozens of ships would jump in and run tactical drills and then jump out again. It was meant as intimidation, a reminder of the Council's overwhelming military superiority. They had thousands of ships and centuries of experience and the combined resources of 200 civilizations. Humanity had fewer than 500 warships. Most were newly built and untested in real combat. On paper, it was no contest. The Council could crush humanity with ease, but numbers did not tell the whole story. Commander Eric Walsh headed humanity's intelligence division, and he had spent 3 years studying Council military doctrine. He presented his findings to the military council, and his report was both encouraging and terrifying. The Council races have not fought a real war in over 3,000 years. Their tactics are ancient. Their crews are trained for peacekeeping and patrol duties, not warfare. They are numerically superior but strategically stagnant. They have forgotten how to adapt and innovate and improvise. Someone asked the question everyone was thinking. Are you saying we could win? Eric chose his words carefully. I am saying we could make victory cost more than they are willing to pay. The Council maintains order through overwhelming presence, not through destruction. They have never had to face an enemy willing to make them bleed for every inch of space. They have never fought an opponent who would rather die than submit. That gives us an advantage that no amount of ships can overcome. As the fifth year approached, humanity faced a critical deadline. The Council had given them 10 years to dismantle their colonies and accept the quarantine. At the halfway point, not a single settlement had been abandoned. Instead, humanity had built 40 new ones in secret locations throughout the outer system. Small colonies on asteroids and moons that the Council did not know existed. Research stations in deep space conducting experiments that would horrify the ancient species. Weapons platforms hidden in the Kuiper Belt ready to ambush any fleet that tried to invade. Humanity had not been idle during these years of supposed compliance. The Council was losing patience, and everyone knew it. Their monitoring drones reported constant violations of the quarantine. Their observers documented military buildup on a scale that suggested humanity was preparing for war, not surrender. In the crystal chambers, debates raged about what to do. Some delegates argued for immediate military action. Others counseled patience. A few even suggested that perhaps the quarantine had been a mistake. But the Council was a massive bureaucracy, and it moved slowly. Every decision required consensus from 200 species, and achieving that consensus took time. Humanity was counting on that delay. Every day the Council debated was another day for human shipyards to produce more vessels. President Cooper stood in his office on Throne Station and looked out at the construction yards where humanity's future was being forged. Ships of all sizes moved through the space around Mars. Cargo haulers bringing raw materials from the asteroid belt. Construction vessels assembling new platforms. Warships on patrol. Civilian transports carrying workers and supplies. It was organized chaos, and it was beautiful. They wanted us to be grateful for our cage. Cooper's voice was quiet but filled with steel. Instead, we built a kingdom they cannot contain. The throne was nearly complete. Soon the galaxy would have to decide whether to accept humanity's sovereignty or try to tear it down. And if they chose to fight, humanity would show them exactly what humans were capable of. The confrontation came in the 7th year, and it arrived suddenly like a lightning strike on a clear day. Captain Nicole Barnes was commanding the Vanguard on a routine patrol 3 light years from Sol, when the emergency alert screamed across all channels. Lieutenant Kevin Ross's voice was tight with tension as he read the incoming data. Council fleet detected at Alpha Centauri, 40 vessels including 6 heavy cruisers. They are broadcasting an evacuation order. Civilians have 72 hours to depart before they begin dismantling Providence Station by force. Nicole felt ice flood her veins, but her voice remained steady. Plot a quantum slip course to Alpha Centauri immediately. Alert all available ships in range. Everyone rendezvous at Providence. We are not letting them take that station. Providence Station orbited a planet in the Alpha Centauri system, and it was home to 80,000 people who had spent 12 years building a life under an alien sun. They had farms and schools and factories. They had children who had been born there and knew no other home. The Council wanted all of it destroyed because it existed beyond the boundaries they had set for humanity. Commander Zoralth led the Council fleet, and he was a veteran of the Enforcement Corps whose species had served the Council for 4,000 years. He had never failed a mission, and he expected the humans to comply once they saw the size of his fleet. 40 warships was more than enough to handle any resistance, or so he thought. Within hours, 16 human warships dropped out of quantum slip space around Providence Station. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1 and outgunned by vessels that had better shields and more powerful weapons. But they formed a defensive perimeter around the colony anyway because that is what humans did. They protected their own even when the odds were impossible. Zoralth's face appeared on Nicole's view screen, and his reptilian features showed no emotion. Human vessels, you are in violation of Galactic Council sanctions. Withdraw immediately or be classified as hostile combatants. Nicole stared back at him without flinching. Providence Station is sovereign human territory. Your fleet is in violation of our space. You withdraw or we make you. The Council commander's crest flared in surprise because never in his long career had such a small force threatened him. You cannot prevail. Our ships number more than twice yours with superior firepower and shields. This is your final warning. Nicole's expression hardened. And this is ours. She cut the transmission and turned to her weapons officer. Arm all weapons. Target their flagship. If they move against the station, we fire first and we fire to kill. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. Every person knew this might be their last day alive, but not one of them hesitated. They had trained for this moment. They had prepared for the day when words would fail and only action would remain. On Providence Station, Colonial Administrator, Janet Morris organized the evacuation of children and elderly while preparing the station's defensive systems. She had lived there for 12 years and helped build it from nothing more than raw materials and dreams. I am not abandoning this place without a fight. Her security chief, Greg Palmer, nodded grimly. The defense turrets are online. We have enough ammunition for maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire. Janet smiled without humor. Then we make those 20 minutes count. Around them, families hugged each other and said words that might be final goodbyes. Some people boarded evacuation ships. Others stayed to fight. It was their choice and they made it freely. The standoff lasted for 3 tense hours. Neither side blinked. The Council fleet maintained position, expecting the humans to see reason and back down. The human ships held formation with their weapon systems hot and ready to fire. Then a Council destroyer moved forward and began deploying boarding craft toward the station. Nicole did not hesitate. All ships fire. The human fleet opened up with everything they had. Missiles streaked across the void, followed by directed energy weapons and kinetic rounds, traveling at fractions of light speed. The Council ships were caught off guard because they had expected more negotiation. The destroyer took 3 direct hits before its shields adapted. 2 Council frigates sustained heavy damage and began spinning out of control. But the return fire was devastating. The Earthship Dauntless lost its main reactor and began tumbling through space, spewing atmosphere and bodies. The Earthship Storm was cut in half by a heavy plasma lance and both sections exploded in brilliant flashes. Evasive maneuvers, Nicole shouted as her ship shuddered under multiple impacts. Kevin, give me damage report. Forward shields down to 40%. Hull breaches on decks 7 and 9. We have casualties. The battle raged for 18 minutes that felt like 18 hours. Human ships used tactics the Council had never encountered. They coordinated quantum slips to appear and disappear seemingly at random. They deployed suicide drones that overwhelmed point defense systems. They used weapons designed not for honor, but for pure efficiency and maximum damage. 3 Council ships were destroyed outright, and their crews never had time to evacuate. 8 more were damaged so severely they had to withdraw or risk total loss. But the human fleet was being ground down by superior numbers and firepower. When Commander Zoralth finally called for a ceasefire, only 9 human ships remained combat capable. This is pointless bloodshed. Surrender the station, and your surviving ships will be allowed to retreat. Nicole sat on a bridge lit only by emergency lights and blood ran down her face from a head wound. She laughed bitterly. You still do not understand, do you? We are not fighting to win. We are fighting so you know there is a price. We are fighting so every species in the galaxy sees that humanity will not go quietly into the cage you built for us. Before Zoralth could respond, a new voice cut across all channels. Admiral Victor Kane announced his arrival, commanding a fleet of 30 ships that had just completed quantum slip from Solar Council forces. This is Admiral Kane of the Sol Defense Fleet. You have attacked sovereign human territory and killed our people. You will withdraw immediately or what is left of your fleet will not make it home. The balance had shifted dramatically. Zoralth looked at his damaged fleet and the fresh human reinforcements and made the only tactical decision available. We are withdrawing, but the Council will hear of this aggression. Victor's reply was cold as space itself. Good. Make sure they hear every word. Tell them humanity draws the line here. Tell them we would rather die fighting than live in chains. As the Council fleet limped away, Nicole surveyed the cost of their defiance. 3 ships destroyed, over 800 crew dead, twice that many wounded. Providence Station had taken damage but remained intact and functional. She opened a channel to the station. Administrator Morris, you still there? Janet's face appeared on screen and tears streaked her cheeks, but her voice was strong. We are still here, Captain, and we are not leaving. This is our home. Those people died defending our home. We will not let their sacrifice be meaningless. The Battle of Providence changed everything. The Council had been bloodied, and that had not happened in living memory for most galactic species. More importantly, humanity had proven willing to die rather than submit. The footage spread across the galaxy within days, carried by traders and diplomats and journalists. Young species watched in awe, seeing a small force stand against overwhelming odds. Old species watched in concern, remembering ancient history, when ambitious species had challenged the established order. Some watched in horror, knowing that blood had been spilled and that blood demanded more blood. President Daniel Cooper addressed humanity in a somber broadcast. Today we paid a terrible price for our freedom. 800 brave souls gave their lives defending Providence Station. They died not as rebels or criminals, but as patriots defending their home. The Council calls our defiance aggression. I call it survival." His voice hardened. "To the Galactic Council, we did not seek this conflict. You came to our territory. You threatened our people. You fired first when we would not surrender. If you want peace, recognize our sovereignty. If you want war, remember that you taught us the price of submission is death. We would rather die fighting than live in your cage." In the council chambers, 200 species debated what had once been unthinkable. A full military campaign against humanity. Some delegates demanded immediate, overwhelming force. Others urged caution. They destroyed 3 of our ships. When was the last time anyone destroyed a council vessel in combat? If we escalate, how many more will we lose? What message does it send if we need an armada to crush one small species? The debate raged, but the truth was clear. The council's authority had been challenged. Blood had been spilled. There was no going back to the status quo. Humanity had built its throne, and now they would have to defend it with everything they had. The galaxy watched and waited to see what would happen next. Would the ancient council back down, or would they bring their full might against the upstart humans? Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. 15 months after the Battle of Providence, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session unlike any in their long history. Ambassador Helen Carter stood before the assembly once more, but this time everything was different. She was not petitioning for membership. She was not begging for acceptance. She was negotiating from a position of strength, backed by a fleet of over 800 warships and alliances with 17 species who had grown tired of council bureaucracy. The chamber was tense, and the usual peaceful atmosphere had been replaced by something harder and more dangerous. The council had lost ships and crew members for the first time in thousands of years, and they did not know how to process that reality. The council has a choice. Helen's voice was clear and steady. You can accept that humanity will never submit to your quarantine, which means a war that will cost thousands of lives and destabilize the entire gate network. Or you can accept our terms for peaceful coexistence. The Arbiter Zethkora seemed diminished somehow, as if the events of the past year had worn away some of its crystalline certainty. You speak as if you have already won. Helen met its gaze without fear. We speak as equals, something you refused to acknowledge 3 years ago. She activated a holographic display that showed humanity's expanded territory. 24 colonies spread across systems the Council had ignored for centuries. Manufacturing capacity that rivaled civilizations 10 times older. And most concerning to the Council was evidence that humanity had shared their quantum slip technology with allied species. In trying to contain us, you gave us no choice but to become the very threat you feared. But we are offering you a different path. The terms were simple but revolutionary. Humanity would formally withdraw any claim to Council membership. In exchange, the Council would recognize the Sol Confederation as an independent stellar nation with full territorial rights. Trade would continue through neutral stations, but neither side would interfere in the other's internal affairs. Most radical of all humanity proposed a new framework for younger species. An alternative to Council membership that offered protection and trade rights without the centuries-long probationary period. The Serpentine delegate Sorth hissed in anger. You would fracture galactic unity. Helen shook her head. We would offer choice. The Council has done magnificent things, but you have become rigid. You reject new ideas and new approaches because your system worked for 10,000 years. But the galaxy is changing, and species like mine are proof that the old ways are not the only ways. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Species argued about tradition versus progress and stability, versus freedom and wisdom versus ambition. The younger races largely supported humanity's proposal because they saw their own frustrations reflected in human defiance. The ancient species were divided. Some saw humanity as a dangerous precedent that would undermine everything the Council had built. Others recognized that the galaxy could not go back to the way things were before Providence. Blood had been spilled, and the illusion of Council invincibility had been shattered. President Daniel Cooper watched from Earth, knowing the outcome before the vote was cast. The Council could not afford the war, and they could not afford to appear weak. Compromise was their only path forward, even if it hurt their pride. When the vote came, it was closer than anyone expected. 112 species voted in favor of the treaty. 88 voted against. The Galactic Council had never been so divided in its entire history. As Arbiter Zeth Cora formally recognized the Sol Confederation, Helen felt no triumph. Only exhaustion and relief. They had gambled everything on the belief that humanity could stand against the galaxy, and somehow they had survived. Back on Throne Station, Admiral Victor Kane stood with Captain Nicole Barnes watching new ships roll out of the construction yards. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Nicole's question was quiet and thoughtful. Victor considered carefully before answering. "We did what we had to do. Whether it was right, history will judge. But we are still here and still free and still reaching for the stars. That counts for something." Dr. Carl Newman's quantum slip technology was being adopted by a dozen species, creating new trade routes outside Council control. The monopoly on interstellar travel had been broken forever, and the galaxy would never be the same. Governor Paul Richards of Mars received the first official diplomatic delegation from the newly formed Free Worlds Coalition. 15 species had followed humanity's example and declared independence from Council oversight. They wanted to establish embassies on Throne Station and forge new alliances based on mutual respect rather than ancient hierarchy. "It is really happening." Paul's voice was filled with wonder. "We are not just surviving. We are changing the entire galactic order." Ambassador Kyle Porter nodded. "The Council ruled through inertia and tradition. We showed that inertia can be overcome. Now everyone is questioning the old assumptions." In the years that followed, the Sol Confederation grew steadily. Humanity established trade networks and cultural exchanges and mutual defense pacts with dozens of species. Some of the older Council races watched with disdain, but others began reaching out privately. They were curious about these upstart humans who had reshaped the galaxy through sheer stubbornness and refusal to accept limitations. Commander Zoralth, who had led the Council fleet at Providence, found himself commanding a joint task force with Captain Nicole Barnes. They were hunting pirates who had exploited the political upheaval to raid shipping lanes. Working together, they cleared out a major pirate stronghold, and in the aftermath, Zoralth spoke to Nicole with grudging respect. "You are still young and reckless." Nicole smiled. "True, but we are also free and growing stronger every day. And we learned something important. The galaxy is not owned by anyone. There is room for all of us if you are willing to share." 20 years after humanity's rejection by the Galactic Council, a new generation had grown up knowing only freedom. President Sarah Mitchell was Earth's first leader born after first contact, and she gave a speech at the dedication of a memorial to those who had died at Providence. "They told us we were too young and too dangerous and too human to be trusted with the stars. They offered us a cage and called it wisdom. Our response was simple. We would rather build our own throne than beg for a seat at someone else's table." She gestured to the memorial where 800 names were etched in stone beneath words that read, "They died so humanity could live free." This monument is not just about those who fell at Providence. It is about every human who refused to accept limitations imposed by fear. It is about the engineers who built our ships and the scientists who broke the laws others said were unbreakable and the diplomats who forged alliances when we stood alone. Sarah looked up at the stars visible through the station's transparent dome. "The Galactic Council prohibited our expansion because they feared what we might become. In their fear, they created exactly what they dreaded. A humanity united and determined and strong enough to chart our own course through the cosmos. But here is what they never understood. We did not want to conquer or dominate. We wanted to explore and to grow and to take our place among the stars as equals. When they denied us that dignity, we had no choice but to seize it ourselves." Ambassador Helen Carter, now retired, watched the young president with satisfaction. They had come so far from that day when she stood before the Council and heard humanity's rejection. The path had been costly, but they had walked it with their heads held high. A message arrived on Helen's personal display from Zeth Cora. "I write to you in my personal capacity, not as an official of the Council. I have watched your species' journey with great interest. Perhaps we were wrong to try to contain you. Your defiance has awakened something in the galaxy that had been dormant for too long. The courage to question and to change and to grow. For that I offer not an apology but acknowledgement. The galaxy is better for your presence in it, even if we were too blind to see it at the time." Helen composed her response carefully. "The galaxy is vast enough for both wisdom and audacity. Perhaps your Council's greatest achievement was teaching humanity what we are capable of when pushed to our limits. We learned from your rejection that freedom must be claimed, not granted. Thank you for that lesson." She walked through the corridors of Throne Station where humans and Zenari and Drekken and dozens of other species worked side by side. The prohibition had been meant to keep humanity small and contained. Instead, it had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen. A species that built their own throne when denied a seat at the table, and from that throne humanity would continue to reach for the stars not as supplicants or conquerors, but as equals among equals, partners in the eternal dance of civilizations across the cosmos. The galaxy had tried to cage humanity. Instead, humanity had transformed the galaxy itself. The Council's greatest fear had not been humanity's violence or ambition. It had been the precedent they set, that new voices and new ideas, and new ways of thinking could not be silenced simply because they challenged the comfortable order of things. Prohibited by the Galactic Council, humanity had answered by building its own throne, and in doing so, they had opened a door for every species that had ever felt stifled by tradition, every civilization that had been told to wait their turn.